They weren't just bad, they were cheap parts or baffling decisions that doomed them from the start. These cars became legends for all the wrong reasons. Owners cursed them, mechanics dreaded them, and history can't forget them. Here are 12 of the worst and crappiest cars ever built in the world. The 1971 Ford Pinto is one of the most chilling and haunting chapters in American automotive history. A car whose story is far less about engineering ambition or styling missteps and far more about the price of human life when weighed against corporate profits. On its face, the Pinto was Ford's eager answer to a new market reality. Foreign automakers, led by Volkswagen, Toyota, and Datsun, were flooding American roads with small, fuel-efficient cars. And Ford, accustomed to building big sedans and muscle cars, rushed to produce a compact that could compete on cost and economy. The result was the Pinto: simple, lightweight, cheap, and seemingly the right car at the right time for a nation just beginning to reckon with fuel shortages and changing tastes. But behind its modest design lay an unsettling truth that would burn the Pinto's name into infamy forever. What made the Pinto so controversial wasn't that it was slow, Spartan, or cheaply built. Those were almost expected traits in the subcompact segment of the early 70s. Instead, the Pinto became synonymous with danger, tragedy, and corporate denial because of a fundamental design flaw: the placement of its fuel tank. Situated just behind the rear axle and separated from potential impact by only a thin piece of metal and minimal rear structure, the tank was dangerously vulnerable. In even moderate rear-end collisions, the tank could rupture, spewing gasoline into areas where sparks or heat could ignite it almost instantly. Worse yet, sharp bolts from the differential housing could pierce the tank like a spear, and the filler neck could pull out of place, turning the car into a death trap. What emerged later in courtrooms and investigative reports was even more disturbing than the flaw itself: Ford's internal decision-making process. Engineers had identified the fuel tank risk early in development and suggested several fixes: a plastic fuel tank shield, repositioning the tank further forward, or adding a rubber bladder inside the tank. None of these solutions were particularly expensive. Estimates ran from $5 to $11 per car. But Ford executives ran a cost-benefit analysis, now infamously known as the Pinto memo, which calculated that it would be cheaper to let people die, then pay off lawsuits, rather than make the fix standard. The memo chillingly quantified human lives as monetary figures on a spreadsheet, putting a price on death and injury. The result? The Pinto went to market as it was, and the consequences were catastrophic. Stories from Pinto owners and crash victims paint a picture of quiet, daily fear mixed with resignation. One owner memorably confessed, "Every time someone tapped my rear bumper, I smelled gas and prayed," summing up the anxious ritual that came with driving a Pinto. Others spoke of avoiding highways or driving in constant paranoia, acutely aware of the car's deadly reputation. For many, though, the Pinto wasn't a choice born of preference but of necessity. It was cheap, and for families struggling through the economic challenges of the 70s, including the oil crisis and rising living costs, it was sometimes the only option. The human toll was real and horrifying. Documented cases describe low-speed collisions erupting into sudden infernos, passengers trapped inside, unable to escape, flames that spread shockingly fast. Lawsuits began to pile up, and by the late 70s, the Pinto had become a symbol of corporate negligence in the most tragic, human sense. The media and the public seized on the story, and congressional hearings grilled Ford executives, asking how a company could knowingly sell a car with a design flaw that could, and did, kill. Yet, in an ironic twist, the Pinto was a commercial success from a purely sales standpoint, with over 3 million sold by the end of its run in 1980. Its low price tag, small footprint, and fuel economy appealed to exactly the market Ford targeted. But as time passed, the Pinto's reputation became inseparable from its safety scandal. It stopped being just a car and became a cautionary tale, discussed in law schools, business ethics courses, and case studies as the textbook example of what happens when financial calculus overrides moral responsibility. Even decades later, the word Pinto conjures images of flaming wrecks and the cold logic of cost over human life. For car enthusiasts and historians, the Pinto stands out not because of horsepower figures or design innovation, but because it became a mirror reflecting some of the darkest corners of corporate decision-making. Its story still resonates today, a stark reminder that the cheapest fix is rarely the right one when lives are at stake. In the end, the 1971 Ford Pinto is remembered less for its modest engineering and more as a tragic emblem of an era when safety could be sacrificed at the altar of savings. Its legacy is scorched not just into automotive history, but into the broader cultural memory, a permanent warning that behind every spreadsheet calculation, there are human lives that can never be replaced. The Pinto remains, in every sense of the word, unforgettable, not for what it tried to be, but for what it ultimately became, a rolling symbol of cautionary ethics that the industry and society would never dare to forget. The 1981 Delorean DMC12 is one of the most hauntingly beautiful, yet painfully flawed icons in automotive history. A car whose mythos far outshines its reality. Wrapped in brushed stainless steel and shaped by ambition, hubris, and the chaotic swirl of the early 1980s. Built in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland, under the bold vision of John Z. Delorean, a former GM wunderkind turned rebellious entrepreneur, the DMC-12 was meant to stand apart from the automotive establishment, to be more than a car, a rolling statement of individuality, style, and forward-thinking engineering. And at first glance, it was exactly that. Its shape, penned by Giorgetto Giugiaro, looked ripped from the future. Flat, sharp lines, angular windows, and most famously, gull-wing doors that rose like the wings of a mechanical falcon gave it a silhouette no other production car could match. The stainless steel panels shimmered under light, impervious to paint scratches, creating a look that was both futuristic and industrially raw. But this skin-deep brilliance masked a far less glamorous mechanical truth. Underneath, the DMC-12's mid-mounted PRV 2.8-liter V6, a joint venture by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo, produced a deeply underwhelming 130 horsepower in an era when even family sedans sometimes boasted similar figures. Early prototypes had teased turbocharged engines and wild performance claims, but by production, reality forced compromises. The result was a car that, while visually suggesting warp speed, struggled to get from 0 to 60 miles per hour in over 9 seconds, a time so at odds with its radical looks that even casual drivers found it disappointing. And this was only the beginning. As production began in Northern Ireland, plagued by political unrest and labor inexperience, quality control became a recurring nightmare. Panel gaps varied wildly from car to car, electrical gremlins were legendary, and the complex gull-wing doors often refused to open, especially if the notoriously weak battery drained overnight, a not uncommon occurrence. Stories from owners still circulate, like grim parables, rain leaking in from the doors, trim pieces falling off at speed, dashboards warping in the sun. Each quirk added to a mounting list of grievances that contrasted sharply with the car's glamorous promise. And yet, people still fell hopelessly in love. Because the DeLorean wasn't bought with the logical part of the brain, it was bought with the heart. Owners knew what it symbolized: rebellion against Detroit conformity, a tangible piece of bold vision. They accepted the flaws the way one accepts a temperamental but brilliant artist, and sometimes they paid dearly for that affection, financially and emotionally. As one owner famously lamented, "I bought a time machine and it spent most of its time in the past, at the dealer." The car could turn heads at every gas station, yet often had to be towed home afterward. Adding to the tragedy was the collapse of John DeLorean's empire under scandal and financial collapse. His dream, funded in part by government loans and fueled by personal charisma, disintegrated almost overnight when he was arrested in an FBI sting operation, and later acquitted. By the end, fewer than 9,000 DeLoreans had rolled off the line, leaving behind an unfinished legacy of what could have been. Today, the Delorean DMC12 lives on as a cultural icon, immortalized by the Back to the Future films, where its failings became virtues. Its underpowered engine didn't matter when it could travel through time, and its gull-wing doors became as symbolic as the flux capacitor itself. Ironically, the car's real-life flaws contributed to its legend. The struggles, the dreams, and the heartbreak became part of what enthusiasts cherish. Seeing a DeLorean on the road today is still enough to stop traffic, but the true magic lies in its story. A mix of vision, flawed execution, and the human desire to reach for something greater, no matter the risk. In the end, the Delorean DMC12 is remembered not just as a car, but as a tragic, brilliant stainless steel symbol of what happens when daring dreams collide with harsh reality, and how sometimes even a flawed dream can last forever. The 1973 Austin Allegro is one of those rare cars whose name became so thoroughly tangled with mockery and disappointment that decades later, it's almost impossible to speak of it without a wry smile or a sigh. Conceived as the family car that would lift British Leyland from its quagmire of labor disputes, quality woes, and teetering finances, the Allegro was meant to symbolize hope, modernity, and engineering innovation. Instead, it ended up embodying exactly what had gone wrong with Britain's once proud motor industry. A strange, rust-prone, and oddly proportioned little saloon that has lingered in collective memory more as an enduring joke than as a classic. On paper, the Allegro's mission was straightforward. Replace the aging AD016, the best-selling car in Britain for years, with something fresher and more forward-looking. British Leyland envisioned a car that would match European rivals in comfort, practicality, and sophistication. But in practice, cost-cutting, rushed development, and design by committee led to something quite different. The Allegro emerged with a stubby, bulbous shape that critics found almost comical even in its day, and which seemed to defy the sharp, modern lines beginning to define 1970s automotive design. Among its most infamous features was the so-called quartic steering wheel, a nearly square wheel with rounded edges, championed by designers who claimed it would improve legroom and add a futuristic flair. In reality, it baffled drivers, felt awkward in the hands, and quickly became a symbol of the Allegro's off-kilter approach to innovation, change for its own sake rather than improvement. More damning than its looks, however, was its build quality, or striking lack thereof. The Allegro gained a fearsome reputation for doors that often refused to fit properly in their frames, body panels prone to warping, and alarming mechanical reliability. It rested with a speed and enthusiasm that shocked, even in an era where rust-proofing was poor across the industry. Owners joked grimly that if you parked an Allegro near a puddle, it would develop rust spots before you even returned from your errand. In some regions, Allegros were almost disposable cars, worn out or corroded beyond repair well before their mechanical components failed. Drivers soon discovered that the car's advanced hydrogas suspension, meant to deliver a comfortable floaty ride, was poorly tuned and offered none of the sporty handling that younger buyers craved. Combined with the uninspired engines carried over from older models, the Allegro was slow and lethargic, lacking both the charm and the driving enjoyment of European rivals like the Volkswagen Golf or Citroën GS. Contemporary reviews ranged from gently disappointed to mercilessly sarcastic. One review famously quipped, "The Allegro shows just how far you can push customers before they buy something else," capturing the quiet exasperation that set in as buyers deserted British Leyland showrooms in favor of cars that, at the very least, didn't start dissolving in the rain. Yet perhaps what makes the Allegro story almost tragic is that behind the disaster lay genuine ambition and good intentions. British Leyland's engineers and designers were working under enormous pressure, with tiny budgets, management interference, and the looming specter of national economic crisis. The Allegro was supposed to modernize the brand, help the company regain its place in Britain's increasingly competitive car market, and show the world that British engineering could still innovate. Instead, it became a punchline, and not an affectionate one. Today, the Allegro is remembered less for what it was intended to be, and more for what it became, a rolling symbol of an industry's decline, of decisions made for cost rather than customers, and of missed opportunities. And yet, paradoxically, the Allegro's very flaws have earned it a strange cult following. A few lovingly preserved survivors appear at classic car shows, celebrated with an ironic fondness. Enthusiasts recognize that in all its lumpy, rust-prone, Cortic-wheeled awkwardness, the Allegro tells a deeply human story of bold plans undone by reality. In the end, the Allegro's reputation endures, not because it was the worst car of its time, there were arguably worse, but because it so perfectly captured the gap between promise and delivery, between what customers hoped for and what they actually received. It stands today as a cautionary tale, a curiosity, and an oddly charming relic of a time when even the humblest family car could, against all odds, become legendary for all the wrong reasons.
The 1987 Yugo GV arrived on American shores riding a wave of marketing hype and wishful thinking. Billed as the car that would give even the most budget-conscious driver a taste of European motoring for the price of a used domestic beater. For a brief, strange moment, it seemed almost plausible. Here was a brand new hatchback you could buy for under $4,000, complete with shiny paint, a warranty, and the faint whiff of continental charm. But behind the bargain price lay a machine whose quality and reliability were so catastrophically bad that it quickly became a national punchline. A car so flawed that even owners who started out hopeful ended up sharing horror stories over beers, all beginning with the same rueful laugh. Built in Yugoslavia by Zastava, the Yugo GV was essentially a slightly modernized Fiat 127 from the early 1970s, a car that itself had been simple, cheap, and reasonably sturdy in its time. But decades later, assembled in factories battered by economic and political turmoil, the Yugo left the line already riddled with problems. Doors sometimes didn't line up properly. Dashboard plastics cracked in the sun, and electrics developed intermittent faults almost immediately. Mechanics discovered fasteners installed finger-tight or missing altogether, and wiring looms with connectors that seemed designed to pull apart on the first pothole. For many unlucky owners, the flaws revealed themselves almost as soon as they left the dealership. The carburetor had a notorious tendency to ice up in cold weather, which meant stalling at intersections or refusing to start on frosty mornings. The heater, when it worked at all, coughed out only a lukewarm breeze, leaving drivers to scrape ice off the inside of the windshield with a credit card. The suspension felt brittle and cheap, making every pothole sound like it might tear the car in two. Rust was relentless and appeared shockingly early, sometimes before the car even saw its first winter. It wasn't merely that the Yugo was slow, although it was painfully underpowered, with its wheezing 55-horsepower engine struggling to keep pace with city traffic. The real problem was that the car felt fragile in a way that went beyond inconvenience and into genuine danger. Former owners have recounted the surreal terror of seeing parts, side mirrors, door handles, interior knobs fall off in their hands while driving. One particularly unlucky driver had the gear shift lever come away from the transmission mid-shift. As one former owner summed it up with weary humor, every drive was a gamble, and the house always won. The car's legendary unreliability led to absurdly high attrition rates. Many Yugos didn't survive long enough to make it to their first state inspection. Those that did often failed due to emissions equipment that barely worked or rust holes large enough to admit small animals. As word spread, the Yugo became the butt of endless late-night television jokes, the stock answer to "What's the worst car ever built?" and a cautionary tale about how low price can sometimes mean even lower quality. Yet what makes the Yugo GV's story oddly fascinating is how its existence reflected a unique moment in automotive history and geopolitics. Imported by entrepreneur Malcolm Bricklin, the Yugo was supposed to open up a new market segment, the truly ultra-low-cost car for Americans squeezed by inflation and rising living costs. Its very name, GV, short for great value, captured the idea that there was nobility in thrift. And for a fleeting moment, it seemed like it might succeed. Americans snapped up over 40,000 Yugos in the first few years, seduced by the price and novelty. But novelty can only paper over so much. In the end, the Yugo GV's mechanical frailty, laughable build quality, and dangerous unpredictability were fatal. By the early 1990s, as Yugoslavia descended into war and part supply evaporated, the brand disappeared from American roads almost overnight. Surviving Yugos today are so rare they're almost collector curiosities, though their reputation remains so toxic that few dare to drive them in earnest. Looking back, the 1987 Yugo GV is less a car than a symbol, a rolling lesson in the dangers of cutting every corner, of selling hope without substance. It stands in history not merely as America's cheapest new car, but as the cautionary reminder that sometimes you get exactly what you pay for, and sometimes you get even less. And while the Yugo GV's owners paid dearly in breakdowns, cold mornings, and humiliating roadside waits, they earned something else too, a story to tell, forever prefaced by an exasperated laugh and the words, "Let me tell you about my Yugo."
The 2001 Pontiac Aztec occupies a singular place in automotive history, not simply as a commercial flop or a forgettable footnote, but as a monument to what can happen when bold ambition collides with flawed execution and tone-deaf design. Conceived at the dawn of the crossover craze, the Aztec was meant to rescue Pontiac by injecting youthful energy and rugged versatility into a brand desperate to reinvent itself. Yet, what emerged was a car so visually jarring, so profoundly out of sync with public taste, that it became a shorthand for design failure almost overnight. And while time has softened opinions on many once maligned cars, the Aztec's shape still startles, still prompts a double take, and still sparks the uneasy question, how did this get approved? On paper, the Aztec should have been a success. General Motors saw a market emerging for adventurous young buyers who wanted a vehicle equally suited to commuting, camping, and weekend getaways. Pontiac's design brief was daring. Build something different, something edgy that didn't look like a minivan or station wagon. Early design sketches were striking. Low, wide, almost aggressive, with sleek proportions that hinted at sportiness and capability. But reality, driven by GM's cost constraints and parts bin compromises, forced the shape higher and narrower, resulting in proportions that felt awkward and ungainly. The final production Aztec arrived wrapped in a bewildering mix of sharp lines, odd angles, and layers of contrasting plastic cladding. Its tall, blunt front end seemed permanently surprised, while the stepped rear and split tailgate felt tacked on rather than thoughtfully integrated. Critics compared its design to everything from a mutant insect to melted Lego bricks, and the nickname Aztec, pronounced as an insult rather than a name, quickly took hold in showrooms and online forums alike. But the Aztec's problems didn't stop at styling. Build quality was underwhelming, even by GM's uneven standards of the early 2000s. The plastic body cladding that ringed the car was prone to fading, cracking, and warping under sun and weather. Inside, the cabin felt hastily designed and cheaply built. Brittle plastics, awkwardly placed controls, and upholstery that wore out quickly and stained easily. Many owners reported rattles and squeaks within the first year, undermining whatever rugged image Pontiac had hoped to project. Yet what makes the Aztec story so paradoxical, and even tragic, is that beneath its infamous exterior lay genuinely clever ideas. It was among the first American crossovers to offer an optional all-wheel drive system. Its interior featured a removable cooler between the seats, a washable cargo tray in the rear, and rear seats that folded flat or could be removed entirely. Most famously, you could buy an optional tent package that turned the Aztec into a makeshift camper, complete with an inflatable mattress. These touches showed real thought for active families and weekend adventurers, hinting at what the Aztec might have been if the execution had matched the vision. But for many owners, the practical features couldn't outweigh the embarrassment of being seen in one. "It drove fine, I just never wanted to be seen in it," one owner confessed, a sentiment echoed by thousands who found themselves apologizing for their car at stoplights. The Aztec became a fixture in late-night television monologues and design school lectures as a case study in how corporate design committees can blunt bold ideas into something nearly unrecognizable. Even Pontiac's own marketers admitted privately that they had no idea how to sell it once they saw the finished product. Commercially, the Aztec was a disaster. GM had ambitiously forecast annual sales of up to 75,000 units, envisioning a cultural icon. In reality, the Aztec barely managed to sell half that number in its best year, and by 2005, production ended quietly, eclipsed by new models like the Pontiac Torrent that learned from its mistakes. Yet in a strange twist, the Aztec's reputation has evolved over the years, from pure scorn to something approaching cult fascination. Its starring role in the television series Breaking Bad gave it unexpected cultural cachet, and some enthusiasts now appreciate it precisely for its oddity, a rare and bold swing from a conservative era of automotive design. Still, no amount of retrospective nostalgia can fully erase why the Aztec is remembered, not for its versatility or thoughtful features, but for its appearance, a shape so off-putting it became legendary. In the end, the 2001 Pontiac Aztec stands as a lasting lesson in automotive history. Vision matters, but execution matters more. And no amount of clever ideas can rescue a design that the world simply can't love. And so the Aztec endures, not merely as an ugly car, but as a cautionary tale of missed potential, and of what happens when you dare to be different, but forget to also be beautiful. The 1979 Fiat Strata, known in most of Europe as the Ritmo, is a car whose story reads almost like an unintentional satire of late 1970s automotive ambition. A moment when slick advertising and hopeful engineering collided violently with grim reality in the form of spectacularly bad build quality and shocking corrosion. Fiat, determined to modernize its image and convince a skeptical public that Italian cars could be as advanced and reliable as anything from Germany or Japan, poured resources into promoting the Strata not merely as another compact hatchback, but as a technological marvel. Its famous advertising slogan, "Hand-built by robots," was meant to suggest futuristic precision and industrial innovation, a bold promise to buyers that this was a Fiat unlike any before it. Instead, what owners got was a car whose problems were so blatant and immediate that it seemed as though the robots themselves had staged a quiet rebellion. Visually, the Strata was certainly distinctive. Penned by Bertone, it wore a blunt, angular face and oversized round headlamps that gave it a slightly cartoonish yet oddly appealing look. Inside, the car felt airy and modern for its time, with an avant-garde dashboard design and practical hatchback versatility that should have positioned it as a strong competitor to rivals like the Volkswagen Golf and Renault 14. But these virtues evaporated the moment the car hit real-world roads. From the first production run, quality control was catastrophically poor. Doors often came misaligned straight from the factory, sometimes requiring force to shut properly or refusing to open at all once closed. Window seals were so badly fitted that panes could rattle loose and, in several well-documented cases, fall right out of the door frames. Paint, applied too thinly and inconsistently, began to fade or peel within months under normal weather, exposing the notoriously rust-prone Italian steel underneath. And once rust began, it spread with startling speed. Rear wheel arches bubbled, sills corroded, and floor pans dissolved into flaky orange lace. Perhaps most famously, the Strata's underbody rusted so aggressively that some owners reported seeing daylight through the floor before the car was even halfway paid off. One UK buyer's rueful confession, "By the time I paid it off, I could see the road through the floor," became emblematic of the Strata's bitter ownership experience. A car that depreciated faster than anyone could have imagined, quite literally crumbling away beneath its driver. And the mechanicals offered little consolation. The engines, carried over from older Fiat models, were willing enough when new, but suffered from carburetor issues and poor cold starting. Electrical systems were infamously temperamental, with fuses blowing and gauges failing without warning. Owners quickly learned to treat each drive as an adventure. Would the wipers work today? Would the heater? Would the lights stay on after dusk? Fiat dealers swamped with warranty claims sometimes struggled even to keep enough replacement parts in stock. All of this was made worse by the contrast with Fiat's futuristic advertising. The image of graceful robotic arms assembling each Strata in perfect sync had led many buyers to expect a new standard of fit and finish, even luxury. The gulf between expectation and reality made the disappointment sharper and the reputation harder to shake. Rather than heralding a new era for Fiat, the Strata became, in much of Europe and the UK especially, a cautionary symbol of exactly why Fiat could not be trusted to deliver durable, well-made cars. And yet, the tragedy of the Strata is that it wasn't entirely hopeless on paper. Its ride and handling were surprisingly composed for a budget hatchback, its cabin layout was practical, and styling quirks gave it a dash of Mediterranean charm absent from its staid rivals. But rust, failing hardware, and unfulfilled promises overshadowed every virtue. Today, surviving Stratas and Ritmos are astonishingly rare, thanks in large part to the very corrosion and neglect that plagued them from birth. Enthusiasts who've rescued them speak of cars that are oddly lovable in their eccentricity, light, agile, and unmistakably Italian. But even these loyalists concede that the car was, by every rational measure, a disaster in its day. In the end, the 1979 Fiat Strata stands as a rusted monument to a moment when marketing ambition outpaced engineering discipline, and when the dream of robotic perfection met the very human failings of rushed production and cost-cutting. It is remembered not for its forward-thinking design, but for the broken window seals, seized locks, and the creeping rust that worked faster than its modest engine ever could. A story of promise corroded away, quite literally, before owners' eyes.
The 2003 Seongyong Rodius is one of those rare cars whose very existence seems to defy belief, a rolling monument to the unpredictable places that ambition and misplaced styling inspiration can lead. Conceived by Seongyong, a South Korean brand better known at the time for rugged, boxy SUVs, the Rodius was pitched as a luxurious family MPV whose sweeping lines and grand proportions were, in the words of its creators, meant to echo the spirit of an elegant luxury yacht gliding across the sea. In reality, the end result was less Riviera and more cartoon meltdown, a vehicle so visually confusing and awkward that it seemed almost to fold in on itself, simultaneously bulbous, jagged, and slumped. Designed by the usually brilliant Ken Greenlee, the man responsible for the stately Aston Martin Lagonda, the Rodius was supposed to blend the grace of a yacht with the practicality of a full-sized people carrier. But what emerged on the road was a strange collision of clashing curves and ill-fitting panels, topped with an ungainly, towering rear end that looked as if it were hastily grafted onto a completely different car. The side windows stretched and shrank in bizarre proportions, the rear three-quarter view appeared lumpy and unfinished, and the whole silhouette left many onlookers blinking in disbelief. Critics and internet forums quickly found a rich seam of comedy in trying to describe it, with one UK journalist famously writing that it looked like three cars in a collision, frozen at the moment of impact.
Yet the Rodius's problems went far beyond its much lampooned appearance. Under the bonnet lay a 2.7-liter 5-cylinder diesel engine, co-developed with Mercedes-Benz, which on paper seemed promising. But in practice, it rattled and grumbled at idle and roared hoarsely under throttle in a way that made highway cruising an exercise in patience rather than pleasure. The interior, though vast and undeniably practical, felt built down to a price. Hard plastics, clunky switchgear, and seats that seemed more suited to a budget minibus than anything evoking luxury. Even the touted yacht-inspired dashboard design felt oddly cheap and awkwardly laid out. Behind the wheel, the Rodius handled with all the agility of an actual small ferry. The steering was vague, the suspension wallowed in corners, and the sheer length and width made it feel unwieldy in tight European city streets. Road testers were unsparing in their reviews. "A van you'd rather walk than drive," one quipped, neatly summarizing the profound gap between what the Rodius promised and what it actually delivered. Yet for all its stylistic crimes, there were flashes of real practicality hidden beneath the unfortunate styling. The Rodius could seat up to 7 in genuine comfort with luggage space to spare, even with all seats in place. The cabin layout, modular and endlessly refigurable, genuinely suited family holidays, airport shuttles, or large groups needing cheap transport. But these virtues were hopelessly buried under the tidal wave of mockery that the design unleashed. The public response was brutal and immediate. Online car forums, journalists, and even casual observers made the Rodius the butt of jokes almost from day one. Its image suffered so thoroughly that even people who had never sat behind its wheel knew it as that van, the one you'd cross the street to avoid being seen next to. Sales reflected the reputation. While it found some niche use as airport taxis or fleet shuttles, private buyers largely stayed away, and the car lingered on sale in some markets, more out of stubbornness than success. Yet, strangely, the Rodius has gained an odd kind of cult status in recent years. Its sheer boldness, its unapologetic weirdness, and the stubborn way it carried on despite universal ridicule have made it a guilty pleasure for a small but loyal band of enthusiasts. To them, the Rodius is the ultimate underdog, a car that tried to be different, even if it spectacularly failed. Today, the 2003 Seongyong Rodius remains a legend of accidental comedy and car design, proof that good intentions and ambitious ideas can sometimes lead to outcomes that no wind tunnel, focus group, or CAD software could predict. It stands as a rolling reminder that there's a fine line between daring and disastrous, and once the world sees a melted yacht on wheels, it never quite forgets. The 1975 Trabant 601 is much more than just a car. It's a rolling symbol of an era, a stark emblem of life behind the Iron Curtain and the peculiar challenges of communist-era engineering. Manufactured in East Germany, the Trabant was designed to be affordable, simple, and easy to maintain for the masses living under the rigid constraints of a planned economy. Yet its very simplicity became both its defining charm and its Achilles heel, producing a vehicle that was as much a cultural icon as it was a mechanical relic struggling to keep pace with the modern world. One of the most distinctive features of the Trabant was its body. Unlike Western cars of the time, which used steel panels, the Trabant's shell was made from duroplast, a hard, lightweight material crafted from recycled cotton fibers and phenolic resin. This made the car incredibly resistant to rust, a huge advantage given the rough conditions and often subpar maintenance opportunities behind the Iron Curtain. But the Duraplast also gave the Trabant a somewhat plasticky, lightweight feel, reinforcing the impression that it was less a proper automobile and more a bare-bones contraption designed to get you from point A to point B with minimal fuss. Under the hood, the Trabant's two-stroke, two-cylinder engine was both its signature and its greatest flaw. Producing a modest 26 horsepower, it was painfully slow by Western standards, with a top speed just over 60 miles per hour. The engine was notoriously smoky, filling the air behind it with clouds of blue-gray exhaust that became a familiar sight on East German streets. This pollution wasn't just an environmental issue, it was a constant reminder of the Trabant's dated technology and the economic limitations that prevented East Germany from adopting cleaner, more efficient designs. Despite its flaws, the Trabant was prized for its reliability and ease of maintenance, qualities born of necessity more than design brilliance. In a world where replacement parts were scarce and professional mechanics were few, the Trabant was famously simple enough to be repaired with little more than a hammer, some string, and a lot of hope. Owners shared stories of patching up their cars in creative and desperate ways, sometimes even keeping spare engines in the trunk for emergencies. The Trabant became less a car and more a community project, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of its drivers. The biggest challenge, however, wasn't the car itself, but the near impossible waiting times to own one. Due to production limitations and high demand, prospective buyers in East Germany faced waiting lists that stretched for over a decade. Getting a Trabant was as much a lottery of patience and perseverance as it was a practical necessity. Those lucky enough to receive their Trabi were often viewed as having attained a prized status, despite the vehicle's many shortcomings. Owners affectionately nicknamed the car Trabi, a term that captures both fondness and frustration. Even those who relied on it daily couldn't resist the humor in its quirks, joking, "It's the only car you can fix with a hammer, string, and hope." This blend of affection and exasperation encapsulates the Trabant's unique place in history, not just as a means of transport, but as a cultural artifact that carried the weight of an entire political and social system. In retrospect, the 1975 Trabant 601 is more than a slow, smoky, plastic-bodied relic. It's a symbol of a lost world, of everyday people navigating hardship with creativity and grit. Its legacy lives on in the memories of those who drove it, the clouds of smoke that once filled Eastern European skies, and the stories of perseverance woven into the very fabric of its Duraplast body. The Trabant may have been a humble car, but it remains a towering symbol of history, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of its drivers.
The 1980 Chevrolet Citation was meant to be General Motors' bold leap into the future, a front-wheel drive compact designed to compete directly with the rising tide of efficient imports flooding American showrooms. Introduced amid high expectations and heavy marketing, the Citation was supposed to redefine GM's image, offering innovation, modern styling, and fuel efficiency at a time when the company desperately needed to keep pace with the likes of Toyota, Honda, and Volkswagen. Instead, it quickly became one of the most notorious debacles in American automotive history, a cautionary tale of rushed development, quality control failures, and the pitfalls of prioritizing speed over substance. At its core, the Citation was built on the then-new X-Body platform, one of GM's first major attempts at front-wheel drive across multiple brands. The design promised nimble handling, spacious interiors, and a modern, aerodynamic shape that looked fresh next to the boxy rear-wheel drive compacts of the 70s. When it hit the streets, the car's initial reception was cautiously optimistic. Buyers appreciated its roomy interior, relatively smooth ride, and the promise of lower fuel consumption. But that optimism quickly faded as problems began to pile up. What really sank the Citation was its staggering string of mechanical and safety failures, many of which emerged only months after launch. Brake systems were prone to premature wear and sudden collapse, creating terrifying situations where the car would unpredictably lose stopping power. Worse yet, the suspension components suffered from design and manufacturing flaws that caused the front wheels to toe in or toe out spontaneously, making the vehicle veer unexpectedly at highway speeds. This phenomenon wasn't just a minor nuisance, it became a serious safety hazard, sparking a wave of recalls and lawsuits that sent shockwaves through GM's management. Rust was another relentless enemy. The Citation's thin sheet metal and poor rust proofing meant corrosion could rapidly eat away at wheel wells, door bottoms, and undercarriages, sometimes exposing drivers and passengers to structural weakness long before the car's mechanical life should have ended. For an automaker with decades of experience, this was an embarrassing failure and a blow to consumer confidence. The car's build quality was erratic to say the least. Owners soon flooded Consumer Reports and other automotive publications with hundreds of letters documenting their frustrations, many describing the Citation as unreliable, cheaply made, and downright dangerous. One owner's memorable lament,
It took 3 citations to get one that mostly worked, echoed the experience of countless others who found themselves stuck in a revolving door of repairs, dealer visits, and mounting bills. Inside, the Citation's interior was modest but unremarkable, with materials that felt cheap and prone to wear. Controls sometimes malfunctioned or fell apart, and the ride, while initially smooth, could become unsettled due to suspension issues. Despite these flaws, some drivers clung to their Citations, attracted by the car's roomy cabin and reasonable fuel economy, in an era of skyrocketing gas prices. The backlash against the Citation went beyond customer complaints. The car became a symbol of GM's decline in quality and innovation during a crucial time when Japanese automakers were rapidly capturing market share with their reputation for reliability and engineering excellence. The media pounced on the Citation's failures, and it soon appeared on numerous worst cars lists, cementing its legacy as one of the most disappointing mass-market vehicles ever produced by an American automaker. Production ended after just a few years, but the Citation's damage lingered for GM. It tarnished the company's image, shook consumer trust, and served as a painful lesson about the dangers of rushing a product to market without thorough testing and quality assurance. Still, the Citation story is not just one of failure, it also reflects the intense pressures facing Detroit in the early 1980s, from economic recession to changing consumer tastes and relentless foreign competition. In retrospect, the 1980 Chevrolet Citation stands as a stark reminder of a time when ambition outpaced execution, and where a car meant to save a giant instead nearly brought it to its knees. For those who lived through it, the Citation is remembered not just as a flawed machine, but as a chapter in the complex story of American automotive history, one filled with hope, disappointment, and the relentless struggle to adapt in a rapidly changing world.
The 1997 Daewoo Nubira arrived in the American and global markets, riding a wave of cautious optimism mixed with curiosity. Daewoo, a South Korean automaker relatively unknown outside its home country, was eager to establish itself as a global player by offering modern, affordable vehicles with appealing styling and a tempting slogan, "You'll be amazed." The Nubira was meant to be the flagship of this new wave, a compact sedan that promised contemporary design, reasonable performance, and value far beyond its modest price tag. But for many owners, that initial amazement soon gave way to frustration, disappointment, and a litany of reliability woes that turned the Nubira from a hopeful newcomer into a byword for cheap and poorly built cars. The car's styling was arguably one of its few strong points. The Nubira sported clean, if unremarkable, lines that fit comfortably into the mid-90s compact car segment. Inside, it offered a surprisingly roomy cabin for its class, with a simple but functional dashboard layout. Buyers looking for a no-frills commuter found the Nubira's ride acceptable, and the modest 4-cylinder engines promised decent fuel economy. It seemed, at least on paper, to be a competitive package. Unfortunately, the reality quickly fell apart. Paint quality was abysmal. Owners often reported that the clear coat began peeling within the first few years, leaving patchy, faded panels that exposed the underlying primer and steel. This cosmetic failure wasn't just unsightly, it invited early rust, which plagued many Nubiras and cut short their lifespans. Mechanical durability was equally disappointing. Suspension bushings wore out prematurely, resulting in creaks, rattles, and vague handling that made the car feel unsafe at times. The electrical system was prone to glitches. Owners complained about flickering gauges, malfunctioning lights, and faulty sensors that triggered warning lights with no clear cause. Under the hood, minor engine issues were common, and once one problem appeared, it seemed the car quickly developed others, creating a cascade of repairs that wore down even the most patient drivers. Perhaps the most galling issue was resale value, or rather, the lack of it. The Nubira depreciated rapidly, a victim of its poor reputation and the flood of better-built used cars in the same price range. Dealerships often struggled to sell used Nubiras, forcing owners to accept steep discounts or trade-ins. For many, the cost of maintenance combined with plummeting resale value turned what looked like an affordable purchase into an expensive mistake.
In countless online forums and owner clubs, the phrase, "every noise turned out to be something serious," became a refrain among Nubira drivers, capturing the relentless, grinding wear and tear that seemed baked into the car's design. Where some cars age gracefully, or at least predictably, the Nubira aged like a ticking time bomb, with small issues snowballing into expensive and frequent repairs. Despite all these problems, the Nubira did have its small band of loyal owners who appreciated its low purchase price, roomy interior, and basic transportation capability. For some, it served as a gateway to car ownership and a stepping stone towards more reliable vehicles. But by and large, the 1997 Daewoo Nubira remains remembered as a textbook example of how an automaker's good intentions and catchy slogans can be undone by poor build quality and insufficient long-term durability. Looking back, the Nubira's legacy is a cautionary tale not just for buyers, but for manufacturers aiming to break into competitive markets. It stands as a reminder that the initial amazement promised in flashy marketing must be matched by solid engineering, consistent quality control, and respect for customer experience. Without these, even the most hopeful new entry can quickly fall apart, leaving only disappointment in its wake. The 1998 Chrysler Sebring convertible arrived with high hopes of capturing the hearts of American drivers craving affordable, stylish open-air motoring. Chrysler aimed to blend sleek design cues with everyday practicality, offering a convertible that looked modern and inviting on the outside. It promised fun summer drives and weekend cruising under the sun, a dream that seemed within reach for many middle-class buyers who wanted flair without the luxury price tag. But behind the glossy marketing and attractive curves lay a car whose many flaws soon turned that dream into a lesson in frustration and endurance. Styling was arguably the Sebring's strongest card. Its smooth, flowing lines and balanced proportions gave it a tasteful presence that stood out in the crowded late 90s market of bland convertibles. The fabric roof folded neatly away, revealing a surprisingly roomy cabin with seating for four. Onlookers often admired its European-inspired design touches, and initial impressions were generally positive. Yet beneath this promising exterior, the Sebring convertible was riddled with chronic issues that eroded owner confidence fast. One of the most notorious problems was the convertible roof itself, which was prone to leaking even after minor rain. Water intrusion wasn't just a nuisance. It could lead to mold, electrical failures, and persistent odors that made the cabin unpleasant, especially in humid climates. Fixing or replacing the roof seals was expensive and often only a temporary solution. The interior, while initially attractive, didn't age well. Dashboard plastics were cheap and brittle, cracking under the harsh glare of the sun after only a few years. Owners frequently complained about fading surfaces and peeling veneer, creating a cabin that looked worn out and neglected far earlier than expected. Small trim pieces loosened or fell off altogether, adding to a feeling of low build quality. Mechanically, the Sebring's weakest link was its transmission. Whether paired with the automatic or manual gearbox, many owners reported premature failures, sometimes at shockingly low mileages. These breakdowns often led to expensive repairs or full replacements, with parts availability a recurring headache that dragged out repair times. One frustrated owner described the experience perfectly: a car that teaches you patience because it spends weeks waiting for parts. This delay turned what should have been routine maintenance into prolonged downtime, sapping the joy from ownership. Other mechanical issues were common too. Suspension components wore quickly, causing clunks and rattles. Electrical gremlins popped up with alarming frequency. And the engine, while generally reliable, sometimes suffered from overheating and cooling system problems. Together, these faults combined to make ownership more a test of endurance than enjoyment. Despite all these troubles, the 1998 Chrysler Sebring convertible did have some redeeming qualities. Its ride was comfortable, and its handling was competent for a car of its class. Buyers attracted by its looks and open-air driving experience found moments of genuine pleasure when the roof was dry, the sun was shining, and the car cooperated. But these moments were often overshadowed by the persistent mechanical and cosmetic failings that came to define the model. The Sebring's legacy is a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing style and marketing over quality engineering and durability. It remains a reminder that a car's charm fades quickly if the essentials, roof integrity, interior longevity, and reliable mechanics aren't there to back it up. Today, surviving Sebring convertibles are rare, often valued more for nostalgia than dependability. In the end, the 1998 Chrysler Sebring convertible is remembered not just as a stylish car, but as a vehicle that tested its owner's patience, resilience, and sometimes their wallets. For those who owned one, it was a lesson in the highs and lows of driving a dream that too often became a headache. The 1970 Reliant Robin is not just a car. It's a fascinating chapter in the eccentric annals of British automotive history. A vehicle that simultaneously inspires bewilderment, affection, and outright disbelief. Conceived during an era when the UK was grappling with the economic realities of the 1970s, rising fuel prices, increasing urban congestion, and a market hungry for affordable personal transportation, the Robin emerged as a bold and unconventional solution. With its three-wheel layout, lightweight fiberglass body, and the remarkable ability to be driven on a motorcycle license, it challenged every norm of what a car should be. Yet, in doing so, it carved out a distinctive niche all its own, attracting a strange mix of enthusiasts, practical owners, and curious onlookers. At first glance, the Reliant Robin looks almost toy-like. Its diminutive stature, rounded yet somewhat angular fiberglass bodywork, and quirky single front wheel give it a whimsical, almost cartoonish appearance. This was no accident. Reliant designed the Robin to be as light and cheap as possible, using fiberglass not just for its rust-proof qualities, but also because it could be molded inexpensively into the distinctive shape. Weighing in at just over 1,300 pounds, it was feather light compared to most other vehicles on the road. This lightness, combined with its narrow track, was both the Robin's greatest asset and its most notorious flaw. The three-wheel design meant that the entire front end rested on a single wheel that managed steering duties. While this layout helped the car qualify as a three-wheeler under British licensing laws, allowing drivers to operate it without a full driver's license, it also created an extremely narrow footprint for cornering stability. The Robin became infamous for its tendency to tip, especially during sharp turns or evasive maneuvers. The physics were brutal. Push the car too hard into a corner, and the centrifugal force would lift one of the rear wheels off the ground, causing the whole car to balance precariously on just two wheels. Many drivers experienced this unnerving sensation firsthand, and it quickly became part of the car's lore. One owner's darkly humorous comment, "You haven't truly driven until you've balanced on two wheels by accident," perfectly captures the mix of terror and thrill the Robin could inspire. This precarious balance also meant that the Robin was not the safest vehicle on the road. While it could be a practical city runabout, its handling dynamics demanded respect and caution. Sudden lane changes, high-speed cornering, or emergency maneuvers were all fraught with risk, and the Robin's tipping tendency often scared off would-be buyers looking for reliable, predictable transport. Yet, for those who embraced the challenge, the Robin offered an oddly rewarding driving experience, a car that demanded skill, attention, and a willingness to embrace its quirks rather than fight them. Mechanically, the Robin was built for economy rather than performance. Early models featured modest four-cylinder engines, initially 600 cc's and later 700 cc's, producing just enough power to propel the lightweight car through city streets and short highway jaunts. The engines were simple, easy to maintain, and famously frugal with fuel, which was a critical selling point during the oil crises and economic hardships of the 70s and 80s. Its tiny engine meant the Robin was slow, Accelerating was leisurely at best, but it was also cheap to run, insured and taxed at lower rates than full-sized cars, making it attractive to a range of drivers, from young learners to retirees. The fiberglass bodywork, while innovative and rust-proof, had its own quirks. The material was more prone to cracking and damage from impacts than unusual characteristics. The Reliant Robin filled a vital role in the UK and certain export markets. It was affordable, accessible, and practical for those who needed just basic transportation, and it appealed especially to drivers who wanted to avoid the higher costs and licensing requirements of full-size cars. Its small size made parking and maneuvering in tight urban environments easier than many other larger vehicles could manage. Culturally, the Robin transcended its utilitarian roots to become a beloved British icon, albeit one often mocked for its eccentricity. It became a favorite subject for comedians, cartoonists, and television shows, frequently portrayed as the hapless underdog of the road. Its unique shape and instability made it a perfect foil for humor, and references to the Robin's tendency to tip over became a staple joke in British popular culture. Despite the mockery, the car's quirky charm and distinctive silhouette earned it a loyal fanbase that has only grown over time. In the decades since production ended, the Reliant Robin has evolved from a practical oddity to a sought-after classic for collectors and enthusiasts. Its rarity, combined with its status as one of the most unusual cars ever built, means well-maintained examples command attention at vintage car shows and rallies. Owners appreciate the Robin not for its performance or luxury, but for its personality, its slice of British history, and the uniquely challenging driving experience it offers. In the end, the 1970 Reliant Robin is much more than just a three-wheeled car that's sometimes tipped over. It's a testament to a particular time and place, a symbol of British ingenuity and eccentricity, and a reminder that automotive history isn't always about horsepower or luxury. It's also about character, culture, and the courage to be different. For those willing to take the risk, driving a Reliant Robin is an adventure unlike any other. A balance of precarious physics, stubborn charm, and a story that continues to fascinate and entertain generations of car lovers worldwide.